All right, so Islamic monotheism, huh? I've got to say, this is one of those topics that always gets me thinking.
Yeah, it's a big one for sure.
We've got this study guide on Islamic monotheism, right?
Yep.
And this lecture by Yusuf Estes.
Mm-hmm.
It's called Why Say One? And, we always hear that God is one kind of thing, but it seems like there's a lot more to it than that.
Oh, yeah, definitely. A good place to start is with the term Tawhid.
Okay, Tawhid.
Which is often translated as the oneness of God.
Right.
But it's a lot more than just a number.
Okay, so then what is it getting at?
Well, it's really about how Allah is understood in Islam.
Okay.
It's recognizing that Allah is absolutely unique. There's nothing else like him.
So not just one of a kind, but beyond comparison.
Exactly. And that's where the Arabic term ahad comes in.
Ahad.
Which Yusuf Estes really emphasizes in his lecture.
He does seem to think that's important.
He argues that simply translating it as one diminishes its true meaning.
What makes ahad so special then?
It kind of points to a level of uniqueness that's beyond, I think, anything we can really grasp. It's not just about singularity. It's about being absolutely incomparable.
Okay.
And that's critical to understanding Islamic monotheism.
It really makes you think about how language can shape our understanding of something so, so big.
Right.
It makes you wonder if we can ever fully get it in translation.
Yeah, and I think both the study guide and Yusuf Estes' lecture acknowledge that.
Yeah.
There are limits to how we can put these concepts into other languages.
Okay, so we've got Tawhid, this concept of Allah's absolute uniqueness, and ahad, which emphasizes this incomparability. Is there anything else we need to sort of keep in mind as we go deeper?
Yes, there's another term that's central to this understanding.
Okay.
Ilah.
Ilah.
Often translated as God, but it actually has a broader meaning.
Oh, okay. So how is it different from the way we typically think of God?
Well, Ilah can refer to anything that's worshipped.
Okay.
Or taken as an object of ultimate devotion.
Wait, so not just a divine being.
Not necessarily. People can make all sorts of things their ilah.
Yeah.
It could be money, power, fame, even an ideology.
That's a really interesting way to look at it. So less about a specific entity and more about what we ultimately submit to.
Precisely. And it raises a question that both the study guide and Yusuf Estes highlight.
Okay.
What truly holds power over our actions and our beliefs?
So Ilah challenges us to look inward and examine our priorities, huh?
Yeah.
To see what we've placed at the center of our lives. That's pretty intense.
It is. And both sources emphasize the importance of recognizing Allah as the only true ilah.
Right. Yeah.
And they point to passages in the Quran and the Hadith that stress the temporary nature of the material world and the importance of putting your relationship with Allah above all else.
Okay, so we're starting to see how this concept of Tawhid, of Allah's absolute uniqueness, plays out in a very practical way. It's about aligning our priorities, recognizing that there's nothing else worthy of our ultimate devotion.
Right. And this leads to another important aspect of Islamic monotheism. Okay, Allah's attributes.
I have to admit, this is where I sometimes get a little confused.
Oh, yeah.
We often hear Allah referred to as He.
Right.
But I know there's more to it than that.
Yeah, you're right to point that out.
Yeah.
And it's a point that both the study guide and Yusuf Estes address pretty directly.
Yeah.
They make it clear that Allah is beyond gender.
Okay.
And the use of masculine pronouns in the Quran is a linguistic convention. It's not a literal description of Allah's nature.
So the He isn't meant to imply that Allah is male.
Exactly. Yusuf Estes compares it to the royal we. Sometimes plural pronouns are used in the Quran when referring to Allah, but it's not about suggesting plurality.
Right.
It's about conveying majesty.
I never thought about it that way, but that makes a lot of sense. It's like a way of emphasizing his grandeur and power.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And it ties back to this concept of Tawhid.
Right.
Allah's attributes are a reflection of his absolute uniqueness, his transcendence beyond human limitations.
So how does this understanding of Allah's attributes, how does it impact the way Muslims approach their faith?
Well, it informs everything from the way they pray to the way they interact with the world around them. For example, let's look at the Islamic practice of salah.
Okay.
Or prayer.
I've always found salah to be a really fascinating practice. I know it's more than just reciting words.
Right.
But I'd love to hear your perspective on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yusuf Estes describes salah as a sila.
Sila.
Which means connection with Allah.
Okay.
He uses this analogy of plugging into a divine network.
Oh, I like that. It suggests a level of intimacy and direct communication.
Exactly. And, it's important to note that Islamic practices are designed to be fair and just.
Yeah.
Taking into account the different circumstances of men and women.
Okay, that's an important point. Could you give me an example?
Sure. He talks about how women are exempt from salah during menstruation,
Okay.
which is seen as a time of difficulty.
Right.
This exemption doesn't count against them.
Oh.
And it's actually recorded as accepted by Allah.
That's really interesting. It suggests that there's this, recognition of the challenges women face.
Right.
And an accommodation, right, within the framework of religious obligations.
Exactly. And it highlights the compassion and mercy that are central to the Islamic understanding of Allah.
So we're seeing how Tawhid, this concept of Allah's absolute uniqueness, shapes not only the theology of Islam, but also its practical application in the lives of Muslims.
Yes, and this leads us to another pretty intriguing concept.
Okay.
The Islamic view of the world, or dunya.
Okay. This is where things start to get really interesting for me.
Yeah.
I've heard that the world is seen as a kind of prison for believers, but I've never fully understood why.
It's definitely a perspective that can kind of, challenge our conventional ways of thinking.
Right.
Essentially, the idea is that the true paradise, the ultimate goal, is being in the presence of Allah.
So this life, with all its attractions and pursuits, is actually seen as a barrier to that ultimate goal.
In a way, yes. I mean, it's not that the world is like inherently evil.
Right.
But it can become a distraction from the true purpose of life, which is to connect with Allah.
Right.
And to prepare for the hereafter.
That's a really profound way to look at it. I mean, it suddenly puts all those things we strive for, wealth, success, even happiness, in a different light.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And it raises the question, how should a believer navigate this world knowing that it's temporary and potentially distracting?
It really makes you think about what truly matters. So how does this view of the world as a temporary state, how does it actually affect the way Muslims live their lives?
Well, it emphasizes, detachment.
Okay.
From worldly possessions and focusing on the hereafter.
Right.
It's not about, rejecting the world entirely.
Right.
But seeing it in its proper context.
I'm starting to see how this ties back to the concept of Isla we were talking about earlier. Recognizing what truly has the ultimate power in our lives.
Exactly. Yeah. If our focus is just on worldly success and just accumulating things, then that becomes our Ila, right?
Right.
But if we understand the world as temporary, then our priorities shift. Towards things that benefit us in the hereafter.
So it's about living in the world, but not being consumed by it.
Exactly.
How does that play out in practical terms?
Yusuf Estes gives some pretty compelling examples.
Okay.
He talks about the importance of generosity, charity. Not as a means to gain social status or anything,
right,
but as a way of purifying your wealth.
Okay.
Investing in the hereafter.
That makes sense. It's about using the resources we have in this world to benefit ourselves spiritually.
Right.
And to help others.
Exactly. He also talks about patience. Perseverance in the face of trials and tribulations. He uses this Arabic word sub, which encompasses not just patience, but also steadfastness, endurance.
Oh, I can see how that would be essential with this worldview.
Right.
If you see this life as a test, then challenges become opportunities for growth and spiritual refinement.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that, difficulties are not just arbitrary. They're part of Allah's plan. It's about trusting in his wisdom, even when things are tough.
I'm curious how this concept of the world as a temporary state, how does it impact the way Muslims approach death?
It shifts the perspective, I think, from fear and dread to anticipation, hope. If this world is seen as a separation from Allah, then death becomes a reunion, a return to true paradise.
That's a powerful way to reframe the idea of death. It's not an ending, but a transition to a higher state of being.
Exactly. And that's why, for Muslims, preparation for the hereafter is a constant thing.
Right.
It's not something you just do at the end of your life.
So it's about living each day with an awareness of our ultimate purpose and striving to kind of align our actions with that.
You got it.
Yeah.
Now, all of this leads us to a pretty crucial question.
Okay.
If this world is temporary and our focus should be on the hereafter, how do we ensure we are staying true to the path?
That's a great question. Is that where this idea of beta comes in?
Yeah.
Yusuf Estes seems pretty fired up about this in his lecture.
He does. He describes beta as any innovation in religious matters.
Okay.
It's about adding to or taking away from the original teachings of Islam. And he's very clear.
Okay.
It's something to be avoided.
Why is that? What's the problem with introducing new practices or interpretations?
It kind of boils down to the Islamic understanding of revelation.
Okay.
The belief is that the Quran and the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad are like complete,
Right.
perfect. Any attempt to change them or modify them is seen as a deviation from the true path.
I see how this connects to the concept of Tawhid.
Yeah.
If Allah is unique and his revelation is complete, then there's no need for like additions or alterations.
Precisely. Yusuf Estes even compares it to building a house without following the architect's blueprint.
Huh.
You know, you might think you're improving things, but you're messing with the original design.
That's a great analogy. It highlights the importance of preserving the integrity of the original teachings.
Right.
But isn't there a risk of becoming like rigid or inflexible?
Yeah.
How does Islam adapt to the changing times while staying true to its core principles?
That's where the concept of ijtihad comes in.
Ijtihad.
It refers to the process of Islamic legal reasoning and interpretation.
Okay.
It's about applying the principles of Islam to new situations, new challenges.
So it's not about changing the core teachings, but about finding ways to apply them in a contemporary context.
Exactly. It's a dynamic process that allows for adaptation and evolution while still being rooted in like the foundational principles of Islam.
It sounds like there's this careful balance between preserving the authenticity of the tradition and recognizing the need for interpretation in like a constantly changing world.
It is, yeah. And it's something that's been debated and discussed by Muslim scholars for centuries.
It seems like this whole concept of Tawhid, of Allah's absolute uniqueness, has such profound implications. I mean, for like every aspect of life.
Yeah.
From the way Muslims pray to the way they approach ethical dilemmas.
It really does. And it's something that I think we can all learn from regardless of our own personal beliefs, you know?
Right.
This idea of submitting to a higher power, of recognizing that there's something greater than ourselves.
Yeah.
It's a universal concept that resonates across, you know, cultures and traditions.
It's about humility, isn't it?
Yeah.
Recognizing that we're not the center of the universe.
Exactly. And that realization can be incredibly liberating.
Yusuf Estes also talks about something he calls fitra.
Yes.
It's this idea that all humans are born with an innate inclination towards belief in God.
Right.
I have to admit, I find this concept really intriguing.
It is fascinating, yeah.
Yeah.
He argues that this inclination is present in everyone, regardless of their background or their upbringing.
So even if someone hasn't been exposed to religion, there's still this inherent yearning for the divine.
That's the idea. He uses the example of a child who naturally turns to like a higher power when they're in need.
Right.
Even if they haven't been, you know, taught about God.
I can see that. I remember when I was a kid, I used to, I don't know, talk to the trees in my backyard like they were listening to me.
Exactly. Yeah. It's that innate sense of wonder, of knowing that there's something bigger than ourselves, that he connects to fitra.
Okay, so how does this concept of fitra fit into the bigger picture of Islamic monotheism?
Well, it reinforces this idea that Islam is not about imposing a foreign belief system,
Okay.
but about aligning ourselves with our natural state of being.
It's about rediscovering something that's already within us.
Precisely.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why he says converting to Islam is not so much about like changing who you are,
Right.
but about coming home to your true self.
That's a really beautiful way to put it. It suggests that there's this, I don't know, universal truth that we're all seeking. And Islam provides a path to connect with that truth.
You got it.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing the oneness of God.
Right.
That's reflected in our own inherent nature.
This is making me think about how Tawhid impacts the way Muslims understand their own lives.
Yeah.
You know, if Allah is the ultimate creator and we are part of his creation, does that mean our lives are like predetermined?
That's where this concept of divine decree comes in. Or qadr. It's this idea that Allah has already determined everything that will happen, you know, from the grandest events
Right.
to the smallest details of our lives.
So it's like our lives are preordained. Does that mean we don't really have free will?
It's a complex concept. You know, it's been debated by theologians for centuries.
Right.
Islam does teach that we have free will, you know, the ability to choose our actions. But Allah already knows what choices we will make.
Okay, I can see how that could be a bit confusing.
Right.
How can we have free will if Allah already knows what we're going to do?
Think of it like this. Imagine you're watching a movie.
Okay.
You know what's going to happen
Right.
because you've seen it before,
Yeah.
but that doesn't change the fact that the characters in the movie are making their own choices.
Oh, I see. So it's like Allah has this perspective that encompasses like the whole picture, past, present, and future all at once.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
And that's why, from an Islamic perspective, there's no such thing as coincidence or chance.
Okay.
Everything happens according to Allah's plan.
So even when like terrible things happen, tragedies, injustices,
right,
it's all part of a bigger plan.
Yes. And that's where the concept of
right,
that patience and steadfastness comes in.
Okay.
It's about trusting in Allah's wisdom, even when we don't understand his ways.
So it's not about passive acceptance,
right,
but about actively seeking meaning and purpose in our experiences.
Exactly.
Even the difficult ones.
It's about recognizing that everything happens for a reason, even if that reason isn't immediately apparent to us.
This is all incredibly thought-provoking. I mean, it challenges the way we typically view the world and our place in it.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And it kind of leads us to another profound concept.
Okay.
The Islamic understanding of the afterlife.
I know that heaven and hell are like central to Islamic belief, but I'm curious to hear how they're understood in light of what we've been discussing.
Yeah. Yusuf Estes makes a really important point in his lecture.
Okay.
He says that heaven and hell are not just physical places.
Okay.
They're states of being.
Oh, that's interesting. Could you elaborate on that?
He explains that heaven is being in the presence of Allah, experiencing his love and mercy,
Okay.
while hell is being separated from him, cut off from his grace.
So it's not about fire and brimstone,
Right.
but about the quality of our relationship with Allah.
Exactly. And it ties back to that concept of dunya as a prison.
Right.
It's the separation from true paradise.
Yeah.
From that ultimate connection with Allah.
So our actions in this life directly impact our state in the afterlife. Yusuf Estes talks about like how our deeds are constantly being recorded.
That's right, yeah. And it's not just about the big things,
Right.
the grand gestures.
Right.
It's about the small details as well. He even uses this analogy of a camera that's constantly recording our lives.
Uh-huh.
Capturing every action, every word, even like every intention.
So there's no escaping accountability?
Not from Allah's perspective, no.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so important to live our lives with like intention.
Okay.
With awareness of our ultimate purpose.
This is getting pretty deep.
Yeah.
It makes you think about your own actions and motivations.
It does. And that's one of the things I find so fascinating about Islamic monotheism.
Yeah.
It's not just a set of beliefs. It's like a way of life that permeates every aspect of our existence.
It's a constant reminder to be mindful, right? To be aware of our connection to Allah and to strive to live in a way that pleases him.
Exactly. And that's why he emphasizes the importance of seeking knowledge.
Okay.
Constantly learning and growing in our understanding of Islam.
Because the more we understand Tawhid, the more we can align our lives with it and the closer we can become to Allah.
And that ultimately is the goal of Islamic monotheism.
I'm noticing a theme throughout Yusuf Estes' lecture.
Oh, yeah.
He seems to be addressing a lot of common misconceptions about Islam.
You're right. He spends a significant portion of his talk dispelling stereotypes and clarifying the true teachings of Islam.
For example, he tackles the perception of Islam as a violent religion.
That's a big one, yeah.
Oh.
And he's very passionate about, setting the record straight.
Right.
He emphasizes that the Quran, explicitly condemns aggression and violence.
He also points out that the Prophet Muhammad himself was a man of peace.
Right.
Who always sought to resolve conflicts through dialogue and diplomacy.
Yes. He gives the example of the Treaty of Hudaybiyah.
Okay.
Where the Prophet Muhammad and his followers were prevented from performing the pilgrimage to Mecca.
Right.
Instead of resorting to violence, they negotiated a treaty. That ensured their safety and allowed them to perform the pilgrimage the following year.
It seems like a powerful example of prioritizing peace and reconciliation, even in the face of, provocation.
Absolutely. And it challenges that narrative that Islam is inherently militant or, expansionist.
Another misconception he addresses is the meaning of jihad.
Right.
Which is often translated as holy war.
He's very clear that holy war is a mistranslation.
Okay.
That distorts the true meaning of jihad.
Right.
He explains that jihad actually means, struggle or striving.
Right.
And that it encompasses both internal and external efforts.
So it's not just about, physical battles,
Right.
but also about this personal struggle for, spiritual growth, self-improvement.
You got it, yeah. He emphasizes that the greatest jihad is the struggle against our own ego.
Okay.
our own desires, and temptations.
That makes sense. It's about conquering our own inner demons, striving to be a better person, aligning our will with the will of Allah.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And while he acknowledges that, defensive warfare is permitted in Islam to protect oneself and one's community from aggression, he's adamant that, offensive warfare is strictly forbidden.
It sounds like he's drawing a clear distinction between violence for self-preservation and violence for conquest or domination.
That's right, yeah. He wants to emphasize that Islam is a religion of peace that values justice and compassion.
Another point he tackles is this idea that Islam oppresses women.
Yeah, that's a pervasive stereotype that he's very, keen to dismantle.
Right.
He points out that the Quran grants women numerous rights, including the right to own property, to inherit wealth, to choose their own husbands.
He even mentions that the Prophet Muhammad's first wife, Khadijah, was a successful businesswoman who proposed to him. That's pretty progressive, even by today's standards.
It is, and it challenges that image of, Muslim women as submissive and powerless.
Right.
Yusuf Estes argues that any oppression of women in Muslim societies is a cultural issue, not a religious one.
It seems like he's trying to kind of disentangle the core teachings of Islam from the cultural practices that have developed over time.
Exactly, yeah. He wants to highlight the fact that Islam, in its pure form, upholds the dignity and rights of women.
Yusuf Estes also addresses this misconception that Islam is incompatible with modern society.
Yes. He pushes back against that idea that, Islam is, stuck in the past.
Right.
He argues that it's a timeless religion that provides guidance for all times and places.
So it's not about rejecting modernity, but about engaging with it in a way that's consistent with Islamic values.
That's right. And he provides examples of how Islamic principles can be applied to, contemporary issues. Like economics, politics, social justice.
For instance, he talks about how Islamic finance, with its emphasis on ethical investing and risk sharing, can be a model for a more just and equitable economic system.
Exactly, yeah. He sees Islam as a source of solutions for the challenges of the modern world.
It seems like he's encouraging Muslims to be, active participants in their societies, to contribute their talents and perspectives to make the world a better place.
That's a great way to put it, yeah. He's advocating for a proactive and, engaged approach to living as a Muslim in the modern world.
I find it really interesting that Yusuf Estes is so focused on, addressing these misconceptions.
It makes sense when you consider his own, journey to Islam.
Oh, right. He didn't grow up Muslim, did he?
No. He was raised in a Christian family and was actually quite successful in the secular world.
Real?
Yeah. He was a musician.
Wow.
A businessman, and even a chaplain for the U.S. Bureau of Prisons.
Wow, that's quite a diverse background.
It is, yeah.
What led him to Islam?
Well, he talks about how he was always searching for, truth.
Perfect.
For something that made sense of the world around him.
Right.
And he says he eventually found that truth in Islam.
So it wasn't like a sudden conversion experience.
Right.
But rather like a gradual process of seeking and questioning.
Exactly. He describes it as a journey of intellectual and spiritual exploration.
Okay.
That ultimately led him to embrace Islam.
It seems like his personal experience has given him a unique perspective on how to communicate the message of Islam to a wider audience.
It definitely has, yeah. He's able to relate to people from different backgrounds.
Right.
And to address their questions and concerns in a way that's informative and empathetic.
This is making me think about how Tawhid, that core belief in the oneness of Allah, can resonate with people from all walks of life, regardless of their background or previous beliefs.
Absolutely, yeah. It speaks to the universality of Islam's message.
Right.
And it's a reminder that even in our differences, there's this fundamental unity that connects us all.
This deep dive has been incredibly insightful. I feel like I've gained a much deeper understanding of Islamic monotheism, but also of what it means to be human.
I agree, yeah. It's been a fascinating exploration of a complex and, profound concept that has implications for, I think, every aspect of our lives.
It's like holding up a mirror to our own souls, challenging us to examine our own beliefs and values.
And sometimes what we see can be quite surprising. It's a reminder that there's always more to learn.
Right.
More to discover, more to experience on this journey of seeking understanding.
It really is. And I think that's what makes this whole thing so fascinating. It's not just about acquiring knowledge.
Right.
It's about a transformation of perspective.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. And speaking of transformation, I think it's important to circle back to something we talked about earlier, the 5 pillars of Islam.
You're right. We were talking about other expressions of Tawhid in action.
Exactly. They're not just like rituals or obligations,
right?
But they're practices that embody and reinforce this belief in Allah's oneness.
It's like they provide a framework, right, for living out Tawhid in a very tangible way.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And each pillar has its own unique significance in cultivating a deeper connection with Allah.
I'm remembering how Yusuf Estes was describing Salah as a sila, a connection, with Allah.
He makes a beautiful point about how Salah is not just about reciting words,
right,
but about cultivating a state of mindfulness, like being present with Allah.
It's almost like a form of meditation, a way of stepping outside of the busyness of life and just centering yourself in the presence of the divine.
That's a great way to put it. And he emphasizes that connection with Allah is accessible at any time.
Right.
Not just doing formal prayers.
So it's about cultivating an ongoing awareness of Allah's presence throughout the day.
Exactly, yeah. And that awareness, in turn, influences our thoughts, our actions, the way we interact with the world around us.
It seems like zakat, the practice of giving charity, also plays a significant role, right, in the expression of Tawhid.
Absolutely. Zakat is a reminder that all wealth ultimately belongs to Allah, and that we are merely stewards of what He has entrusted to us.
So it's not just about giving out of a sense of duty, but about recognizing that our possessions are not truly ours to, hoard.
Precisely, yeah. It's about recognizing our interdependence.
Right.
And our responsibility to care for those in need.
It seems like both Salah and Zakat highlight this key aspect of Tawhid, that it's not just about an individual relationship with Allah, but also about our relationships with each other and with the world around us.
You've hit on a really crucial point.
Yeah.
Tawhid has social and ethical implications that extend far beyond, I think, personal piety.
I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the other pillars. Psalm, the practice of fasting.
Right.
And Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca. How do they fit into this understanding of Tawhid?
Psalm, or fasting during the month of Ramadan, is often seen as a way to cultivate empathy and gratitude.
Okay.
By abstaining from food and drink, we gain a deeper appreciation for the blessings we often take for granted. And it also helps us develop self-discipline, focus. It reminds us that our physical needs are not our only priority.
It seems like Psalm, in a way, echoes that idea of the world as a temporary state. It's about detaching from worldly comforts and prioritizing our spiritual well-being.
That's a great observation.
Yeah.
And Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca, is another powerful expression of Tawhid.
I know that Muslims from all over the world gather in Mecca for Hajj. What's the significance of this gathering?
Hajj is a symbolic reenactment of the journey of Prophet Ibrahim and his family.
Okay.
And it serves as this reminder of the unity and equality of all Muslims.
It's a visual representation, right, of the global Muslim community coming together, united by their shared faith.
Exactly. During Hajj, differences in wealth, status, ethnicity, all those things are stripped away.
Right.
And everyone stands before Allah as equals.
It seems like Hajj kind of embodies the essence of Tawhid on a global scale.
It really does. It's a testament to the power of this belief to transcend boundaries and to unite people from all walks of life.
As we've been talking, I've been struck by the interconnectedness of all these concepts. It's like Tawhid is this central thread that weaves through every aspect of Islamic belief and practice.
You've articulated it perfectly. It's a holistic worldview, that provides a framework for understanding ourselves, our purpose, and our place in the universe.
This deep dive has been mind-blowing. I feel like Tawhid is the key that unlocks a whole new way of understanding the world and our place in it.
I agree. It's been a fascinating exploration of a very, profound concept that continues to inspire and challenge people across, cultures and generations.
Here's a final thought for you to consider. If Tawhid is about recognizing the oneness of Allah, and if we as humans are part of His creation, does that mean there's a fundamental unity that connects us all? Something to ponder.
That's a beautiful question to leave our listeners with. It's a reminder that the journey of understanding Tawhid is an ongoing process, of discovery and reflection.
Well, on that note, it's time to wrap up this deep dive. We've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
From the linguistic nuances of Ahad to the transformative power of the 5 pillars to the profound implications of Tawhid for our lives.
We've only scratched the surface, But I hope this has given you, our listeners, a taste of the richness and the depth of Islamic monotheism.
And as always, we encourage you to continue your own exploration, to seek knowledge, to ask questions.
Because the pursuit of understanding is, in itself, a journey towards truth.
And until next time, keep diving deep.